The vaccine only lasts around 10 months. Are they advocating young children have a vaccine every year like the rest of us, suggests Beverly? I don't know is the answer, Beverly, to be honest with you. And I can see why some people, if you think that is going to be the case, might again just choose not to, or at least to wait to see whether there is an answer to that question. Come back to more of your thoughts on those jabs in just a few moments' time, but I'm joined now by James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister and Conservative MP for Wales, on the news that the Foreign Secretary has told us that Putin could drag out this crisis with Ukraine for months. Very good morning to you, Mr. Heappey. I wonder if that is now the assessment. This tension is now the new normal, sir.
Well, it is a possibility. My fear is that rather than seeing troops moving away from the border, which is what the Kremlin have said would happen, we've actually seen more moving towards the border. And so my concern is that there is still a very imminent threat of hostilities breaking out between Russia and Ukraine. And I don't want to say kind of equally damaging, because clearly it's not, because tens of thousands of people would die in the event of it being a war. But it would be very challenging indeed if President Putin were indeed to just leave this amount of military hard power surrounding Ukraine indefinitely. And I think we have to not only get our heads around how we would support Ukraine and punish Russia if there were to be a war, but also how would we support Ukraine if they were to be left in this kind of noose, if you like, indefinitely.
But that constant threat of Russian invasion, Russian action, almost permanently, feels like we're going back to the Cold War era.
Yeah, and I think that is, whether he invades or not, I think we have to be clear that we are entering a new period of acute competition with Russia that could last a generation or more.
A generational war with those kind of troop presences in places like Belarus, for example?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think sort of the competition with Russia, I think, becomes acute over a generation because exactly what that looks like, does President Putin leave everything in place as a sort of persistent threat against Ukraine? I think that would be unaffordable. It's hugely expensive. One of the reasons I don't think this is just a kind of a wind up or a hoax or a sort of way of undermining Western intelligence is that it costs an incredible amount of money to put 140,000 troops on the borders of a country, to send half of your air force and all of the amphibious shipping. It could be that he has the money to leave it in place indefinitely. It could be that he leaves the hardware in place and takes people away. It could be that he takes it all away and then brings it back again in 6 months' time. But I don't want to convey to you that I think that is the most likely situation. Unfortunately, I think the most likely situation is still that at some point in the near future he'll go for it.
We've given more troops, I think, over to NATO, and they're deployed into various parts of those countries that are closest to Ukraine. Can I bring your attention to issues closer to home, and specifically in the Channel? I see that Priti Patel is going to announce a former Australian minister to oversee a review of border force. What exactly is the Navy doing in the Channel, and how can its success or otherwise be measured?
Well, I think that the reality is that the operation in the Channel is already pretty successful. 97%.
Pretty successful?
Well, and Tom, let me answer the question in full before you try and sort of...
Sorry, I'm just slightly blindsided by the idea that the highest number of people crossing the Channel can be deemed as pretty successful.
Tom, before your viewers go to 30,000 feet, you really need to let me finish my sentence. In that, 97% of the dinghies that go into the water are identified, observed, and are tracked as they move towards the UK. Now, whether they are then intercepted at sea or whether the people as they disembark are arrested or taken away at that point is the concern.
Okay, so hang on a sec. So the measure of pretty successful is we can see them.
I was in the process of answering your question.
Okay. Let's see if we can get to the end of what pretty successful means.
I think that the fact that you know where 97% of the boats are gives you the opportunity to have a pretty high degree of control over the way in which people land in the UK. Now, discuss whether that many boats should be ever putting to sea in the first place, discuss whether or not you want to get to 100% and whether or not you want to intercept all boats at sea rather than actually reaching the beach and being intercepted.
What percentage of the boats that you see taking off end up being intercepted?
Well, 97% of the boats that take off are either intercepted at sea or are met on land by police or border force and detained at that point.
Right, so to go the other way around, what percentage land? What percentage make it through?
As in the breakdown of how many are intercepted at sea, how many make it through. I don't have that off the top of my head.
But that would be the determining factor for whether it was successful, the operation in the Channel with the Navy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the key point that we're working on. The Royal Navy are principally going down there to do a sort of command and control, coordination, relook at the mission and how it could be more effective. The key change that will come soon is that the Borders Bill, the Nationality and Borders Bill, will criminalise the crossing in its own right. And that will change the dynamic in the Channel. So at the moment, the migrants are not breaking the law by physically being in a dinghy heading towards the UK. And they are intercepted as a vessel in distress under the Saving Life at Sea Convention. So the Nationality and Borders Bill that the Home Secretary has been taking through the Commons will criminalise the crossing, and that will change the dynamic in the Channel because it will mean that, because rather than people wanting to be intercepted, at the moment the dinghies effectively get to the halfway line and then hope to be met by Border Force or the RNLI or the Navy or whoever else as a vessel in distress. That dynamic changes as a consequence of the Nationality.
But only if you're stopping more boats. And we don't know what percentage of the 97% are being stopped.
That is the plan. Our view is...
So does that mean more Navy?
No, I don't think it does. Only because the Navy platforms, we're getting into deep technical naval detail, but the Navy platforms sit too high above the water for you to realistically be able to cross-deck people from a
truth is, and
into a warship.
And I hope I've understood you right, Mr.
So the point is we'll need additional platforms that are appropriate to the task, because you need a very low outboard height in order to be able to safely bring people from a dinghy into your vessel.
And is that in train? Is that now happening? So how many of these platforms do we think we might have and by when?
Well, that's the work that is in train, just to make sure that we get the right balance. Because the other thing, Tom, is that some vessels, some dinghies will be so flimsy, overcrowded or whatever else, that the act of unloading them mid-channel may indeed cause a greater risk to life.
Okay.
So what you might envisage is that, your preference would be to intercept a higher number of people in the Channel, and actually the point of arrest now would be in the Channel as a consequence of the Nationalities and Borders Bill. And that, I think, in itself acts as a deterrent, but it changes the dynamic in the Channel. With other dinghies, you might need to kind of shadow it into shore with a rib or something, and then arrest them on the beach, because it'd be too dangerous to do anything otherwise.
That will be very difficult for the Royal Navy to do, I think, to try and arrest people. I don't know whether they have the power.
No. But you need to be clear that the Navy is involved in a command and control function.
Right.
We will provide extra ships for the purpose of kind of coordination of the effort, but Royal Navy sailors, Royal Marines are not warranted and are therefore not empowered to enforce the law.
So the platforms
and Royal
would
Navy
be
vessels are inappropriate. Sorry?
Do you have a ballpark figure for how many platforms are being built, paid for, in order to be deployed in the Channel to help?
So, we'd be looking to lease a certain type of platform. I'm not going to give you the name of the platform here and now, not least because it might find that the market price for those platforms goes up as a consequence.
Can you give me an idea of scale?
Yeah, I think we're looking maybe that we would need anywhere up to another 10 of the kind of larger vessels that you would use to do the mid-channel cross-decking. And then I'm guessing that we would need a number of smaller vessels to shadow dinghies to the shore. But a lot of this is yet to be modelled, and so I think sort of 10 is the sort of upper end of the number that we'd require. It may be that we need far fewer. That's exactly what the admirals that we've tasked to do this are crunching away on their calculators right now.
We look forward to seeing it. Just very finally, while I've got you, is the advice to British citizens that they should leave Ukraine if they now? And is the advice too that people should not be going to Ukraine?
Absolutely, and I know where you're going.
Well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm planning, planning on staying here, to be honest, Minister, following the advice. Although I see one of your colleagues, Mr. Elwood, is in Ukraine now.
Okay, I thought you were going to mention that the ambassador is still there. And
No. I'm just interested to see that your Conservative colleague, Mr. Elwood, has gone to Kiev, presumably for meetings with defence.
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that following the advice?
It's unwise. And I think that if you are not engaged in the official diplomatic effort of Her Majesty's government, it's probably not the best thing to have done. But Tobias will have made his own judgment. And I suppose he might argue that he, like a number of journalists, felt that it was his duty to be able to go forward and ascertain the facts with his own eyes and have conversations and then come back in order to be able to better perform his duties as a committee chair in the House of Commons. I hope, however, that it doesn't wrongly encourage people to go against the travel advice. I think that the ambassador and her team are being extraordinarily brave staying, but they recognise that the diplomatic effort needs to continue, and without an embassy in place, that's impossible. And similarly, if government ministers go to Ukraine over the next few days, that is very, very risky indeed, but it is necessary in order to keep the diplomatic effort alive.
Very good to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time. James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister, Conservative MP for Wales. More detail on the police investigation into Prince Charles's charity in a few moments' time after the news at 8.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, rail and ferry passengers are facing disruption after Storm Dudley brought strong winds and heavy